Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Kitchings Table. I'm your host, Earl Kitchings, and as we like to share with you on Tuesday mornings, we want to bring you something new, something knowledgeable, something of insight, something fun. Wherever it might take us, that's where we want to bring it to you. So join me in welcoming my co-host, Ms. Ronline Cannady. Good morning, Ronline.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well so far. How about yourself?
Good, thank you.
Well, good. So today, Ronline, is one of those topics of historical importance, I would say, simply because it talks about American history again from a perspective of the from the views and eyes of Black Americans. And when I found out about this particular story, it just hit me to know that something like this occurred and how things can be moved or changed or taken or whatever the case may be. So, as we get started this morning, before I give you the topic of our show today, I want to give you different words. Four different words. And I'm going to give you the words and I'm going to give you the definition of the words because they all relate to the topic of today and the plight that that particular situation had on a community. So, the first word is displaced. Displaced. And the definition of displaced is take over the place, position, or role of someone or something. To take over the place, position, or role of someone or something. Displaced. Then the next word is displacement. Displacement. And displacement is the moving of something from its place or position. So you can become displaced and you can have displacement. So to take over a place or is displaced, to move that place is called displacement. So you got displaced and displacement. Now we move to the next word, condemnation. Condemnation. And of course, in that word, you hear the word condemn. Now, we all know that uh, from a physical perspective, when we talk about something being condemned, that means it's no longer suitable to utilize, live in, inhabit, whatever. So condemnation is officially declare, especially a building, to be unfit for use. Now, I emphasize that especially a building in the word condemnation because I want you to put in everyone's mind. I want you to think building because that's what we are typical of seeing condemned, a building. We see buildings that have come into disrepair or become, as they say, dilapidated or just worn down or just they're inhabitable and they get condemned. The city and or the state condemns that building. So saying you can't stay here anymore because it's unsafe, it's inhabitable. So condemnation officially declare, especially a building, to be unfit. And finally, here's I have to thank my civics teacher from ninth grade, Mr. Green, when he shared this particular two words with us and gave us the definition and the meaning of what happens to people when this takes place. Eminent domain. Eminent domain. And eminent domain is the right of a government, the right of a government or its agent to expropriate. That's a word for you, Ronline. Expropriate private property for public use with payment of compensation. That's a heck of a definition. The right of a government or its agent to expropriate private property for public use with payment of compensation. In its simplest manner, if the government was building a new road and your property, your house, was in the way of this new road, and they wanted to run that road through your property, they're going to make you an offer for your house so that they can continue the project. But the kicker is this: if you choose not to take the compensation, if you think your house is worth 200,000 and they offer you 125,000 and you say I'm not moving, then they will come expropriate. Basically, they will take your property and will give you no compensation. Eminent domain. So, eminent domain, condemnation, displacement, displaced. All four of those words have a bearing on our topic today, which is the Black community of Dulles. Not Dallas, not Dallas, but Dulles. Now, when you first hear Dulles, Ronline, what comes to mind?
The airport
The airport. Located where?
in Virginia.
Near what major city?
Don't know.
Oh, come on. Have you ever flown into Dulles?
No, I know a few people that have.
And where were they going?
Uh, some were going to Maryland, some were going to New York, other places.
And what major city would you think is in that particular area? Major city.
Mm. And the one that I know of,
Say
right
it.
off Newport News.
No.
Okay.
Dulles is located in Fairfax County, Virginia. Fairfax County, Virginia is a suburban area of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So Dulles Airport is another airport that you can fly into if you want to go to Washington, D.C. And of course, Washington, D.C. is the nation's capital. Government. So the Black community of Dulles. So now, by size, Washington Dulles International Airport is ranked 5th in the nation by size. It covers 20.3 square miles. 20.3 square miles. Sprawling over 13,000 acres. 13,000 acres. 20 square miles. Not 20 miles, 20 square miles. And for those who may not understand what a square mile is, north to south, a mile, east to west, a mile, that makes for a square mile. So it's a mile in all directions, not just north to south or east to west. It is basically that amount of land, northwest, east, south, that like a square, like a towel on your floor, the square towel on your floor. Imagine that being a square mile. So if you put 20 of those down, that's 20 square miles. And unlike those squares on your dining room or kitchen, we're talking about 12 square feet versus 12 square miles. So a square mile, 20 square miles, that's a lot of land. So Dulles, which is a larger airport than Reagan National, which sits in the heart of Washington, D.C., Reagan National does not have nearly the amount of space that Dulles has. And if you've ever flown into Washington, D.C., if you've flown in, flown out of, been at the airport and watching planes come in and out of Reagan National, you witness that. The runway is not very long because it basically sits on a peninsula right there on the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. So there's not a, you got to be exact when they're coming down. They got to hit that runway at the right place. Otherwise, they're going to skid off into the river. Same thing with taking off. They got to get up. Otherwise, they're going to be in the river. And it has space enough to take care of that. But Dulles is just, Dulles is so large that they have these large vehicles where you can put 30 people in a vehicle and it'll take you from the terminal to the place where you will get on the plane to catch your flight. It will travel that far. You can't do that at Reagan National. No. You get to the gate, you get on the plane, it taxis, it takes off, or it lands and it taxis back to the terminal. So when we talk about 20.3 square miles, let's just say if Washington, Reagan National, International, let's just say it was 10 square miles. That's as much space as it takes up, 10 square miles maybe, if not a little bit more than that. But it's not a big airport. It's not a big airport, but the traffic that goes into that airport is tremendous. So they built the Dulles Airport in I think I read it was 1952, 52, 62. But in order for them to build that airport, they had to do what?
Clear that land.
They had to get the land.
Mm-hmm.
They had to get the land. Now, the community that once upon a time is where Dulles Airport is, and right outside of Washington, D.C. in Fairfax, Virginia, once was called Willard. The Willard community. And it wasn't just totally black, it was a black and white community that was between Fairfax and Loudoun counties. But in 1958, this is why I gave you that information about the definitions. In 1958, the federal government sent condemnation letters or notifications to 87 landowners to purchase the property which would become Dulles Airport. The federal government sent condemnation notifications. There was nothing wrong with the land. There was nothing wrong with the land. It wasn't, because if there was something wrong with the land, if it was toxic, if it was something that was unhealthy, unsafe about it, would the government actually be offering money for the land? Oh, no. So they sent out these condemnation notifications in the mail. Since we didn't have electronic mail then, it had to go by postal mail to 87 landowners to purchase the property, their property. And this was en route to displace the community, the black community of Willard. Now, also in researching this topic, I found 52 documented black communities that no longer exist. Between 1870 and 1945, 52 documented Black communities no longer exist, either through eminent domain, either through repository, and I didn't even go into repository. It's like depository, but with the re in front of it. So they condemnation, displacement, whatever the reason was, the government, we need this property because we want to build an airport. But here's the thing. There was another community where a lot of white Americans lived, and it was called Burke. It was called Burke. And at first, they were going to build this airport in the community of Burke. That's where they initially wanted to build it. But here's what happened, Ronline. Here's what happened. The Burke community fought to keep the airport out of Burke and won. So you know what they created? They created a civic organization. From the civic organization, they start writing letters and tell your friends and tell your relatives and tell your political representatives that we do not want to interrupt our community. We don't want to sell our land. We don't want this airport here. So that's what they did. They came up with a plan and they put that plan into action. And what happened was they fought it and they won. Which brings to mind a song, Ronline. It brings about a song. I fought the law, but the law won.
Law won.
I fought the law, but the law won.
Okay.
So, because the community of Willard did not have, I'm not going to say they couldn't form their own civic organization. They didn't have probably the clout, you know. And we're still talking about days of segregation. So you may not have enough clout or money. In this day and terms, they call it a bag. You may not have enough bags to fight this battle. They fought the law, but the law won. So this forgotten community of Willard is where they built Dulles International Airport. They displaced, they condemned, they eminent domained whatever they needed to do. And here's the other part to it. This was done by the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, and they were looking for a place for an international airport in 1958, 57 and 58. So they went out looking and they found the village of Willard. And based on a gentleman who lived there, or his family, let me get his name for you. Mr. Lewis Jett, Jett. This is what he said, quote, "The government sent my father and mother a letter saying our land was condemned. No explanation. Your land is condemned." And the date was September 19th, 1958. And we had to be gone by that date. They were paid a little over $8,000 for their two-story house that he said his dad built and their land. And that land now allows for 3 runways to be at Dulles. $8,000 in 1958. $8,000. So it did not matter. And the sad part to this story too is the people of Burke, when they created their civic association and, fought back, they convinced then President Dwight D. Eisenhower that they didn't need to, you don't need to touch our property. You don't need to touch our community. Let me tell you what, hey, Ike, let me tell you, if you go up the road about 5 miles, there's a lot of land up there. Just leave ours alone. So they went to Willard, Virginia. And from an article written by Mike Grinnell in 2017, it said Dulles Airport was originally supposed to be in Burke, but the neighbors fought it. So let me give you some dates. In June 1941, the Washington National Airport opened in Arlington. That's the one we are familiar with. By 1950, it was struggling with the amount of traffic. So they needed another airport because too much traffic was coming into Washington National. I mean, we're talking about the capital of the United States. How much, a lot of traffic is going to be happening in there. So we need another place. And Dulles is, based on a map I'm looking at, is about 17 miles from downtown DC. Okay. Now, these people who were living out there in Willard weren't bothering anybody. Not a soul. Minding their own business. But the government said we need a new airport and we need space because we what we thought was enough space is not enough. And going forward, we need something that can handle bigger jets and more traffic. So, okay. No, we're not going to worry about the airport in Baltimore. Where can we build this thing? Where can we build this thing? And then another part of an article says large farms were being bought up with 100-acre farms being purchased for $19,000. And in 2017, that equivalated to $180,000. Despite the start of land acquisition to move the project forward, the citizens began to fight back. The Burke Civic Association decided to fight back. 300 local citizens gathered, and we're going to fight back. We're going to fight the law. And we won. Go somewhere else with this project, but we won. We're not going to have it. Okay, well, let's see. Where else can we go? Where else can we go? We like it out here. We like it out here. It's nice. It's a lot of space. So it says that the Black community made an effort to come together to fight. Unlike, as they say, quote unquote, the well-connected Burke community. Well-connected. So the efforts of the Willard community failed. And within 4 years, Ronline, of 1958, within 4 years, the $110 million construction project was complete and Dulles opened in 1962. I'm going to go back to something we talked about a few weeks back. Liberty and what?
Justice.
Liberty and justice.
For all.
Thank you. Liberty and justice for all. That last part does not resonate a lot of times. Justice for all does not always resonate. So a $110 million construction project in the late 50s, that's a ton of money. That's a boatload of money. 4 years it was open. They had passed out flyers. The government, here was a flyer that said government sale at public auction. Original Burke Airport site, Fairfax County, Virginia. Saturday, June 13th, 1958, they start auctioning off plots of land. And what they did not use, they auctioned off, and they consolidate some of this to make the community of Burke Center. This community in 1977, this is when they consolidated and made the Burke Center community, a community with a mixture of homes, businesses, and industry spread over 1,250 acres and connected by natural trails and outdoor spaces. Ooh, I live in Burke Center. Ooh, I live in Burke Center. If the ghost of Willard could come up and just hang around some of those homes and say, you're on my plot of land, you need to move. But this is what happened. Like I said, they made efforts. They wrote letters, called friends, wrote congressmen, vote against the Burke Airport. That was the whole thing. Vote against it. We don't want it. So the Willard community, a Black community, was displaced because their land got condemned for no particular reason, just because the government wanted it. So condemnation went to eminent domain. We're going to condemn it and offer you a small pittance for your property. Now, if you don't take it, we're going to take it. I fought the law, and the law won. Mm-hmm. Hey, we're going to take this break right now. We're at the halfway point. We want to thank you for joining us here on the Kitchings Table this morning, joining us every Tuesday morning to listen and hear something that you may not have known about or do know about, needed some more information. But whatever it is, we want you to take it and share it with someone else. There's nothing better than sharing knowledge and information with someone else who does not know about it. I was not aware of how Dulles Airport came into being. I've flown out of Dulles one time in my whole life. Most of the times, if I'm going to Washington, I always fly into Reagan International or Reagan National, whichever one they call it. I think I enjoy flying in the Reagan National because you get a chance to see the city of Washington up close very quickly, because you leave the airport and you're immediately in traffic. But, you're driving by all the federal buildings, the federal edifices, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Monument. When you leave Washington National Airport, Ronline, you basically pass by the Lincoln and the Jefferson Memorial buildings. I mean, you pass by them. Then you eventually, pass by the Washington Monument and the Capitol. So, just Washington, D.C. to me has always been a fascinating place because so much is going on and so much to see, so much to learn about. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss something. It's so much. But if you fly into Dulles, when you fly into there and look around, you be like, "There's nothing out here. I must be out in rural somewhere because I'm way out. I don't see anything out here but space." But you take that 17, 18-mile drive into Washington, D.C., and you'll be all right. Mm-hmm. So going back to the fact that this Black community of Willard Now, Willard was named after Joseph Edward Willard. He was a Fairfax County delegate to the Virginia General Assembly from 1893 to 1901. He was a politician, and uh, he was considered one of Virginia's richest men. He had a 14-bedroom house on a 50-acre estate in the town of Fairfax. So, of course, he's got power. His money came from his father, who operated the Washington's Willard Hotel. So they had fortunes and they had money, and they were able to get folks to name. Okay, they named the community Willard after this gentleman. Now, near Willard, there was the Willard Crossroads. There were many small families of former slaves and their descendants. The Coram, the Johnson, the Holmes, the Newman, the Lafayette, Robinson, Smith, Thomas families. These farms, on a sustenance level of their few acres, which included a patch of corn, a large vegetable garden, chickens and hogs, and a milk cow. Maybe a heifer and a steer. That's what it says here in this article.
Okay.
And they worked as farmhands and sharecroppers. Farmhands and sharecroppers. Now, of course, as in most Black communities, the focus or the main point of focus in that community was the Shallow Primitive Baptist Church. It was built by its members in 1899, and one guy, he pastored at that church until the age of 95 in 1996. Elder James Bailey was the preacher. He was 21 when he started, so he saw a lot of things. And Pastor Bailey fought the law, but the law won. So they had the church. They had a one-room school. It eventually became a wood school, went to a brick school, opened up in an area not too far from Willard called Oak Grove. Said that the Willard School was jacked up and hitched onto a threshing machine and rolled 3 miles north to the place of Eugene Beard and spent his last years there as an outbuilding near the white children's one-room school. Now, although the community had a mixture of Black and whites, I'm sure there was still that veil line. So, with that being said, Ronline, I'm going to let you make some comments because this has been a lot to think about from the standpoint of how government, when they want it, they will get it.
Yes. So when you talked about the 52 other communities that this has happened to, one of them is one of the landmarks where we known as Central Park in New York that once used to be Seneca Villages. And for Seneca Village to be wiped out like it was never there to form Central Park. And it's like, where is the justice in all of that? They said in Seneca Villages, it was 2/3 African American, and they were free Blacks, okay, back in the 1850s. Okay. And um, one third of that was Irish descent, and less than a part of that were German descent. All of them in those parts thriving and getting along. Now, the reason why they chose to be there rather than into the suburbs of New York is because they wanted to get away from pollution. They wanted to get away from the other toxic things, such as human beings going through the discrimination process. They wanted somewhere where they can be able to thrive, have their stores, go to grocery stores, go to enjoy music goals and things like that without having to be harassed about the color of their skin and who they are and where they come from. So when I look back at what happened with Dulles, the Willard community, it just broke my heart to just start that research. And you mentioned Louis Jett. Well, that is who I'm presenting today. And I'm glad that you did some quotes of what he had to say about it. He became a historian behind all of this because I believe it was his grandmother that was keeping documents about the Willard community and their growth. And what I learned out of that is the things that they were, the documentation that they were keeping. What came out of that is the church where those files were being stored in 2010. It was destroyed by our arsonists on purpose.
Of
So
course.
in 2010, and people wonder like, well, is it about race? Is why we're always dealing with race? Well, because 9 times out of 10, the reason why something happened is race related. Someone didn't like the idea that someone was getting ahead or looked like they were getting ahead or claiming their piece of the pie, if you will. And as you always say, follow the money. So someone is having a little more success, or the idea that they're having any success at all has brought about a building, a church no less, of being destroyed because someone was learning too much about their history. Someone was trying to preserve the history for their generations to come. Because in 1958, 1962, that was a long time ago, but not that long. So, and here we are today in 2024. We're talking more about our history books being destroyed more than ever because that is what's happening. That is our reality right now. So much is being lost already. And now more is going to be lost if we don't do something about it. And truth be told, we better be like those people at Burke in the Burke community. Doing all that you can in order to preserve. So those are my thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for the snippet of information and historical information about Central Park in New York. That was a community of Black people that saw that community basically um, taken. I don't know if they did it with condemnation or eminent domain, but whatever it was, they didn't get paid enough. They never do. And, and going back to the Willard situation, when they decided to uproot people in Willard, they uprooted the church and the cemetery, Ronline.
Yes.
the church and the cemetery, and moved all of that so they can make way for this airport. And because there was such this great need for it, then it did not matter what they had to do, who they had to move, or who they had to displace, or whatever they had to do. It did not matter. The only thing that mattered was that $110 million project being completed. And people wonder why there's such animosity to others when it comes to race relations sometimes. And as it tends to be, the truth is not always spoken of. We won't hear the whole truth. We won't get the real reason why something happened. We'll touch on it, or they'll skirt around it, any way to give it to us, so that those perpetrators of the crime, of the injustice, of the misuse of power, don't get blamed. They don't want that guilt to be known. And that guilt over time comes back to be made known publicly. And although it's after the fact, and there's nothing you can really do about it now, that you can't turn Central Park back into Seneca. They can't turn uh, Dulles back into the Willard community. They can't go back. They can't bring the Native Americans back from Oklahoma from the Trail of Tears and put them back to where they were. It just seems that when the government, uh, those who are in power, and uh, we know where that lines up, when they make that decision and they write the laws, and that's the thing about it. The writing of the laws is what we stand on. And if the law is not on your side, you're not going to come out victorious. So when the song came out, I fought the law and the law won, how appropriate to some situations where you're fighting for your homestead, you're fighting for your property, you're fighting for something that means something to you. But the powers to be make it more about them and what they need and want than how it's going to affect you. And they tend to want to use the almighty dollar. And it's amazing when you put this into context. Let's see. We're going to condemn this land and offer you some money. And ironically, what's printed on the money says, "In God we trust." Think about that. I'm going to take your land and give you some money that's imprinted with, "In God we trust." Yeah, that's some correlations right there, Ronline. So condemnation, displacement. So when you hear about somebody's land got condemned, if there was no health issue with it, you have to wonder what the problem was, because when they condemn land and there's no health issue, that means a project is coming and they need it for what they need it for. Not finding, there may have been the same amount of land 10 miles away, but that's not what they wanted. And there was a community that they originally thought to build this airport, but those people fought back, and they originally wanted to name the airport the Blue Mountain Airport, because you could see the Blue Ridge Mountains as, up in that area. But they chose Dulles, who was a former pilot and someone who they felt would make a better name. So from the Blue Ridge Airport to Dulles, and then of course we have what we have. So that's our topic for today. The Black community of Dulles and what happened to it and why it's not around anymore. So Ronline, we're gonna turn it over to you for your Black History moment.
Thank you so much. All right, our Black History acknowledgement today is Mr. Lewis Jett. Mr. Lewis Jett, um, he was a native of the original Willard community. He was a young child at the time when this eminent domain process came about. Some of you may know that he is the father of James Jett, James Sherman Jett. Those of you that remember James Sherman Jett, he was the American football legend, wide receiver, and Olympic sprinter who played 9 seasons for the Los Angeles and Oakland Raiders from 1993 to 2002 in the National Football League. He attended college at West Virginia University. And with that history being said, what I understood about Mr. Lewis Jett is that he wondered what would life been like had he been allowed to stay on his property, had his parents not had to move. And I often wonder myself, even though he was able to provide a good life with his wife, and to raise his son, who became one of the legends that we know of today, still, with the uprooting of that kind of thing happening, in your childhood, no less. My hat goes off to you, Mr. Jett, and I thank you for the persevering and all of the things that you do for the community, to the awareness and everything that comes along with it, and all of the things that you've survived, to this very moment. So my hat goes off to you, and we thank you here at the Kitchens Table for your contributions to our Black History acknowledgement. I turn it back over to you,
Thank you
Earl.
for weaving that piece of history into our topic of the day, the Black community of Dulles. Mr. Lewis Jett, a native of that community, able to be an integral part of doing whatever he could to save his community, his home. But of course, the federal government was not having it. So we honored the Willard community this morning for their contributions in the state of Virginia, for those people who lived there, doing what they did to make that community a viable community. Like I said, there were 52 documented Black communities in just the Fairfax County area that no longer exist. And Willard was one of them. There were many, many others. Like I said, when you talk about 52, that's a lot. And when you travel and visit that part of the country, just know that those people had their rights, land taken away from them by condemnation.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
until next Tuesday morning, when you can join us again here on the Kitchings Table, I'd like to thank my co-host, Ms. Ronline Cannady, for always being an integral part of what we do here and making everything possible, and bringing us her Black History moment each week. So we ask that you join us again next Tuesday at 10 o'clock for this edition of the Kitchings Table. And as we say each and every week, do something good for somebody else today. Thank you, Ronline, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you.